Hi there and welcome back to the Festival of Politics. I'm Inyasha, one of your co-hosts. Welcome back to day 3, our final day.
And I'm Rory. To kick off today's show, me and Emily spoke with Professor Danny Dorling, a geographer and author who came all the way from Oxford Uni. Here we go.
What is the big thing that most people misunderstand about inequality?
They think that a little bit more money will solve all their problems. So now a little bit of money when you've got almost nothing, huge effect, enormous. A lottery win of £2,000, life-changing. Doubling your salary when you've got a job that's okay anyway, you're not going to get twice as happy. There's this assumption that the way out of what happens is you very, very quickly get used to spending it. And I think that's quite an important misconception, because people tend to think they'll be happy if they work hard and do better than other people, and they tend to think they'll be really happy if they do something like win the lottery and get $1 million. I'll give you a thought experiment. Imagine you've got a scratch card and you win, let's say 20 million. You might think, this is great, I'll be able to buy a house, I'll be able to do whatever. You win 20 million, how much are you going to give your parents, your grandparents, and any brothers or sisters you've got? Just have a think. Would you not tell them? Right? Would you? Right? And you think about that, you can immediately begin to think that actually being rich doesn't necessarily solve your problems. We waste a lot of money on rich people. Their behaviour is really wasteful, they pollute like anything, they're not nice, they often buy political parties and do really bad things. But they're not actually very happy either. And that's what people get wrong. They think they'll be happy if they get more money. So the biggest difference is just individual. Right? We have individual different predilections to be happy or unhappy people, genes or whatever. After that, it's things like age. Average happiness, bad news for you, but tends to go down until you're about 50, and then it goes up again. 90-year-olds are amazingly happy. Just they've made it to 90. You know.
So I've got something to look forward to.
Yeah, I've got something to look forward to. But after that, it's where you live, the country. And more equal countries, people are happier because they're less frightened. And the rich are happy that they're less frightened about crime, they're less frightened about what's going to happen to them or their children. People who are poorer are less poor in a more equal country. People who are richer are less rich. Everybody's happier. If you, in Edinburgh, here, which is one of the most unequal parts of Scotland, and you've got a kid, reasonably well off, I don't know, what is it, 25-30% are going to private schools. So you've got to think, should I send my child to a private school? In a more equal country, you don't have that problem, there aren't any. Mm-hmm. And that's normal, right? The rest of you has hardly any. And then you're going to send your kid to a private school. Well, which one? Can you afford fetters, or is it going to be the slightly not so good private school? Whereas in more equal societies, which is the bulk of Europe, your kids go to school with everybody else, even if you're well off, and they're happier folk.
So you also talked a lot about climate change in your talk. But something I find quite interesting is that I often hear the same sort of people talking about inequality and talking about climate change, but I feel like I rarely ever hear them talked about at the same time. They're often very rigidly separated. So I'd be interested to know how you think the two intersect.
It's nice and close. So the most unequal rich countries pollute far more than the most equal rich countries, which is kind of like really good news. Because there's a lot of things like this that are really good news, where there isn't a conundrum, where you're not having to sacrifice one thing for another benefit. So they are connected very closely. When you increase inequality worldwide, the pollution of the poorest reduces, because quite a lot of the pollution of the poorest is inefficient cooking and heating, wood smoke and so on. But it's tiny. The footprint of the poorest is tiny. The footprint of the top 1% and the 1% and the 1% is unbelievable. Some of them have got space rockets, not just private planes. This is really fortuitous, because there's an old kind of conservative argument that said you can't give people more money because then they're going to pollute. In fact, as long as the money you give people has been taken from the rich, your overall pollution falls.
So Rory, what was it like getting the opportunity to interview Danny Dorling?
It was fantastic. It's such a great opportunity to get to speak with somebody who's so knowledgeable and so articulate and well spoken. I'm really honoured that I got to speak with him.
I know this weekend has been really great. Throughout this festival, we've got the opportunity to speak to some really important people. Caitlin, a member of the SYFF team, she got to speak to Hamza Yusuf. Here it is.
Today, Israel has initiated its plan to take over Gaza City and has called up another 60,000 reservists to commence this plan. They've also approved plans for another illegal settlement in the West Bank. Do you believe at this point that a two-state solution is still possible?
Well, it's looking like a diminishing possibility because the Israeli government, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who we know of course is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, have talked about a greater Israel. So they see one state, the state of Greater Israel, which expands beyond the West Bank and Gaza into other Arab nations. And what we're seeing is the ethnic cleansing of the people of Gaza. Again, that's been talked about quite openly by Israeli ministers. But the very textbook definition of ethnic cleansing is to forcibly remove one population and replace them with another. And that is what we're witnessing. And the world watches on. And in some cases, I'm afraid, in the case of the UK government as an example, some are very openly complicit by selling arms and supporting what we're seeing from the Israeli government. So, look, to answer your question, I think it's a diminishing possibility, but those that believe in a two-state solution, like me, we have to keep urging world leaders to finally do the right thing, recognise the state of Palestine, and take meaningful action so that Israel changes course.
Yeah, of course. That actually leads on to sort of my next question is the UK's government pledged to recognise the state of Palestine in September? Is it a genuine step towards peace or more of a calculated move to sort of preserve public credibility in the wake of the growing pressure and while quietly continuing their support for Israeli military operations? We're still supplying F-35 components and flying reconnaissance flights from RAF Akrotiri.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question because statehood, and in the case of Palestinian statehood, is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. It shouldn't be conditional on the actions of the occupier, which is what the UK government has said. The UK government have said, in a really kind of bizarre logic, look, if the occupation and the atrocities we're witnessing, the forced starvation of the people of Gaza, if that continues, then we'll recognise statehood. If that stops, then we'll not recognise statehood. So it's a really twisted logic. So it shouldn't be conditional or caveated. It should be the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. And of course, the majority of the world does recognise the Palestinian state. So I would urge the UK government to do as Ireland, Norway, Spain did, which is unconditional recognition, in the same way that they unconditionally recognise the state of Israel. If you believe in a two-state solution, you've got to recognise, of course, both states. I would also say the statehood recognition is one element. What we need to see from the UK government is, of course, stopping selling of arms and weapons and components to Israel, who are committing atrocious war crimes and a genocide, in my view. But secondly, more meaningful action and treating Israel, frankly, as apartheid South Africa was treated in the 1980s, which means that we're going to have to take meaningful action until Israel changes its course. I think statements of condemnation, threats around statehood recognition, none of that is going to make Israel change course.
No, of course not. And obviously for you, this conflict, you have a personal connection with this conflict, and I wanted to take the time to ask, how are your family? How are they getting on?
It's very gracious of you to ask. Look, I don't really have the words to describe how bad the situation is. My wife, Nadia, still has family. She has an aunt there. She has a cousin, Sally, and her 4 children, and Sally's husband. And you see the images every day. People are being starved. And we focus often on the children, understandably so, but the adults are starving as well. And forcibly, completely man-made. So we're seeing this kind of man-made deliberate starvation of an entire population. So how is the family? Well, it's impossible for me to describe. We sent Sally, Nadia's cousin, some money, £200 last week. And she was barely able to buy 10 basic items: flour, milk, I think we got some pasta, £200 on less than 10 items of basic necessity that'll probably only last them a week. And of course, we're in the privileged position where we can kind of continue to send money so that they can just survive with the basics. What is happening to those Gazans who don't have that support network abroad, like Sally does? So it's an awful situation, and one that I hope people will be held to account for creating.
So, Caitlin, how was it to be able to speak with Hamza Yusuf?
It was an incredible experience, honestly, to be able to speak to someone of that kind of standing and with that kind of career this early in my own sort of studying and journalism career is something I'm very, very happy with, very proud of, I think. And to be able to ask him about an issue as important as Palestine means probably more to me than I could articulate, I would say.
I heard it was quite emotional at the panel as well.
It was. I mean, it's an emotional issue. I mean, the whole idea of journalists under fire is inherently wrong and it's inherently painful, especially when you are looking to be a journalist. And for myself, war correspondency is my kind of, that's where I'd like to end up eventually, as crazy as it sounds. And with Hamza, he ended the panel quite fittingly on the final will and testament of Anas al-Sharif, who was unfortunately killed a few weeks ago by the IDF in Palestine. Him and 5 other Al Jazeera journalists, their tent was bombed and they all unfortunately passed away. So the emotions ran extremely high in the room at that point. I think for everyone, regardless of if you're a journalist, if you're a filmmaker, if you're just there to listen to the panel, it's just such a tragedy that's taking place. It's hard not to be heartbroken by it, really. And it's just a lack of humanity that is just so, it's hurtful. And yeah, but it was a very fitting end to the panel, and he did a service to Anas, and I hope that he somehow was able to be there and to just see the emotion and how much people really do care. And they're sort of, we are dedicated to carrying on his mission, and he won't be forgotten ever, I don't think.
It's incredible that you managed to cover that.
It's really great that, you know, this festival has opened up opportunities to have these important talks like Journalists Under Fire. You know, for us here at SYFF, we're really getting to understand the inner workings of being a journalist and even the inner workings of Parliament. Like, I had the opportunity to sit down with Ruth O'Reilly, you know. We actually recorded that, so here it is. Could you please tell us a little bit about your role within the Scottish Parliament?
My name is Ruth O'Reilly. I work in the Scottish Parliament's Broadcasting Unit. What we're probably best known for is the transmission of the parliamentary business. So whenever people see footage of First Minister's questions or activity inside committees, that's all work that's carried out by an in-house team. I work within that team, so I would my role is primarily about managing, scheduling, making sure that people turn up, that they're where they're supposed to be.
So that's quite an expansion of what you've done in the past. So I had a little look into what you've been up to, and you've spent most of your career as a producer. Could you maybe tell us a bit about what that's involved?
I always think it's kind of well summed up by the description. It's the person that makes it happen. Mm-hmm. So it's making sure that essential ducks are all lined up in a row. So whether that's the technical elements as well too. Some people would say that's more the role of a production manager, but I think on a smaller scale, a producer does that as well too. The director will ultimately have a vision for what happens. It's the producer that makes sure that the director is in place, I think, as well. But for me, it's mostly really to do with making sure that the whole thing is running and that it happens whenever it's supposed to happen and that there is a product at the end.
So Ruth, we did do a little bit of digging and I found out that you're very big on cycling. So cycling is often seen as a personal lifestyle choice, but it's also a sort of political issue, you know, in terms of infrastructure, like your cycle lanes, bike safety, and especially the climate. Do you find for you cycling is, you know, sort of a political issue as well as like a hobby that you like seriously enjoy? Is it just something that is something you enjoy and it also benefits the environment, or is it something you choose because it benefits the environment?
I can certainly talk to you about what my journey with cycling is. When I first moved to Scotland, I laughed in the face of someone who suggested to me that I cycle to work. I hadn't been on a bike since I was about 12 years of age. So it was by that stage I was significantly over the age of 12. But what I found was there were incentives. There were incentives to buy and to use a bike. It was the first time I'd worked in the sort of environment where I'd always sort of worked in kind of quite small scale organisations. So that was the first thing for me. Coming to the Parliament, there was a Cycle to Work scheme. That meant that I could purchase the bike and pay it off in a way that was at a reasonable price as well too. So it made it affordable and it made it accessible for me.
It's really great to see that film. You know, it was very intuitive to get a little insight into Parliament. I actually made a film of my own about Stirling University. Here it is. I'm Nyasha, and for my short film with the Scottish Youth Film Foundation, I chose to take a look into how universities can become more sustainable with small everyday changes and cooperation. And I thought to myself, what better university to choose than my very own Stirling University?
So, I'm Amy Gove-Caney and I'm the Environment Advisor at the University of Stirling. So I kind of lead on everything to do with sustainability, carbon and environmental compliance and also behavioural change. Next Bike, our share bike scheme. So that means that anybody can really have access to a bike. You can go around in different stations around campus and in the town as well. For staff and students we offer a discounted rate as well. So that's really encouraging people to get out their cars and use active and sustainable travel. When it comes to refurbishments, we've got solar panels on top of a lot of our buildings. So that's a key step that we're taking in terms of renewable. We also have a lot of more vegan offerings as well. So that's again less carbon intensive in comparison to meat dishes, for example. So SYFF is purely, which is a catering outlet that we have on campus, is purely vegan. And I think that is the key thing, that when you get passionate people together, you do tend to drive things forward. There's a lot of motivation, so I would say that is really key when it comes to delivering sustainable and environmental measures. The grounds team, of course, are very passionate about biodiversity, and we had an example when we were in the little court area where we have oyster catcher birds that are often hatching their little chicks, and we make sure that all that sort of area is cornered off to make sure that there's no disturbance there or the birds are not in distress in any way. I think that is the key thing, is if you can get multiple different departments in to try and achieve a common goal, I think that's definitely power in numbers is the way to go in terms of trying to deliver sustainable initiatives.
But a really good example of a student-led project is a community food initiative over here. So at the moment it's a bit empty. We get donations every night at 8 o'clock at night, and you can see how successful it is because there's nothing left.
Do you have any advice for universities looking to expand on their sustainability the way Stirling University has?
Yeah, I mean, this whole project, everything we built, it came from a really grassroots perspective. It came from students. This used to be a student society, a student group, and it just developed into a bigger thing. So really big key thing is just involving students from the very beginning, making sure that they are the catalyst for change. They know best, and they will know better than most of us. And this is power in numbers at the end of the day. So definitely include students. If you want a practical piece of advice, everyone in a university will produce waste. So focus on that waste stream, see how you can redirect it. If you can reuse it, make a little second-hand shop like we've done with our Fair Share program, do that. It's a really simple thing that any university can do.
Hi there, I'm Neve and I'm a fourth year criminology student.
Yeah, it is really nice. I like Stirling, I like the uni.
Do you think students care about sustainability here?
I think being a part of Stirling Uni, it's kind of already ingrained in us to almost support the areas around us and keep it clean as we can. So I do think it is a high priority for students to be sustainable.
How easy does the university make it for you to make greener choices?
When I started Stirling Uni, I was vegetarian of 2 years, and definitely even coming into campus, I could get access to all different types of food that was sustainable enough for me to also eat along with other students.
If you could change one thing to make the campus more sustainable, what would it be?
I think for me personally would be the promotion of sustainability. I definitely know there is options to be sustainable at the uni, but I don't think there's enough talk about how we could do more.
Stirling University isn't perfect, but it shows what's possible when a university takes sustainability seriously. It's about everyday choices that make a difference. It starts in our communities, our campuses, and our daily lives. The question is, who's next?
So, yeah, sure, that was a very interesting film. But you know what I'm curious about? Am I right to think this is the first film you've ever made?
Yes, it was, Tom, and it was actually quite interesting to make it. You know, I've never done anything like that. I've never been in that sort of like film and media role, but it was actually really good and I really enjoyed it. You know, I'm mainly into sort of like interviewing and being in front of the screen, but getting behind the screen was really interesting. Have you done any interviews yourself?
I have, yeah. But one thing I was more curious about your film was, what was your starting point? Because obviously you made the concept, but where did you begin the filming, scripting?
Well, I had already had the sort of idea to use my uni, just because it is so like local and would be very easy to film. So I just sort of started reaching out to people, you know, various people, seeing, you know, who sort of responded back, what sort of stuck. But the B-roll, that was so easy, you know. It's only the uni, but yeah, it was pretty easy. But care to tell me more about your interviewing?
Yeah, of course. So, I attended a misogyny panel and I was lucky enough to speak to Dr. Leigh McCabe after. But first, here's the interview. The panel was very interesting. Of course, it was titled The Rise of Misogyny. But what shifts in culture, technology and politics do you think paved the way for this resurgence of toxic masculinity and the sort of anti-feminist mindset?
So I think for me, and something I discussed in the panel, is far right. The rise of the far right, populist conservative movements that we see are perpetuating these kind of anti-feminist backlash and the kind of harmful ideas around femininity, around masculinity and the roles of women within society. So I think that these ideas, as I mentioned, that aren't just in the UK, that these movements are very well connected. And we see that particularly played out in social media. So I think the rise of social media, and particularly young boys, and accessing this information that previously we wouldn't have been able to, it plays a massive role. And we see influencers such as Andrew Tate playing a massive role in that. And that oftentimes, that, as I say, that these ideas are incredibly harmful around, you know, women's place in society, particularly around sex, and expectations of women and expectations of men and boys as well.
So, today's world, the backlash against feminism, do you think is a spontaneous cultural recoil, or does it stem from deliberate efforts to undermine progressive gains? And if so, who benefits the most from this resistance?
So I think I sometimes struggle with this idea of a backlash. I do agree in many ways that when progressive change is made by movements like the feminist movement, there will be some form of backlash. But I do think it's a targeted attempt to undermine women's rights. And that we're seeing, again, these kind of global movements influencing each other and spreading kind of the strategies that they're using, what works, testing out in different contexts. So I think we need to understand it's kind of active process. It's not just this passive thing that's happening in response to feminist gains. I think we need to see it as a kind of active movement, which is really pushing for these anti-feminist or, you know, these highly problematic gendered ideas and ideologies.
That was a really interesting interview. How did you find it, Tom?
The interview itself was amazing because she really knows what she's on about. The thing that struck me more as the panel, it's kind of concerning. A lot of the things that they had younger people in the audience, I kind of thought this is the views they had. I'm not going to name them, obviously, but one of the audience members ran about the problem with misogyny is caused by OnlyFans models, which I found interesting because I don't see logic in that. Mm-hmm. But besides that, we were talking a lot about feminism and the villainization of feminism.
Yeah.
But a happier note, talking of feminism, am I right in believing you met a feminist icon?
Yeah, so I actually talked to Maria Lokina last night actually. I was up very, very late to go and catch her at her concert or performance. With the rest of the Pussy Riot group that she's been a part of for a long while. And I actually made a film about that, which we'll be seeing right now.
In a country where surviving means being silent, Pussy Riot chose loud, unrestrained noise. A group of young women in neon balaclavas screaming at the top of their lungs, they turned cathedrals, city monuments, and the Putin regime's symbols of vanity into performances that sent ripples through Russia, and then the world. Maria Alyokina has been with the group since the start, and paid the price for it too, serving years in and out of custody and facing horrific conditions. Now she tours the world, creating performances based on her book, Riot Days. Maria spoke to me about how artists like her shake the system up, and about how those on top of it might feel.
Afraid. Well, we can use the word afraid, but it's not only fear. It's like a general concern of influence. Because politician, even if it is like imprisoned politician like Navalny, can make an influence. Definitely nobody from Kremlin will say like, oh, we're afraid of that. But it's uncomfortable for them. And for some of them, it's like highly uncomfortable. Because they want this wealthy life. This is like the main hypocrisy of this regime. They promote so-called patriotism, but they send their children here, they buy property here, bank accounts here, everything here. Picture a country with the faces of protest artists and dissidents it's a challenge, yeah? And you cannot imagine how many great people, you saw just several people, like, I don't know, 15 people on the screen. There are more than 1,500 people imprisoned only for, like, now for protesting against the war and Putin. And before it was more and more, and some of them are not alive. Yeah, but, you know, it's a big work to give people an understanding what country is. Because Russia is a complicated example.
Do you feel like complicated represents your relationship with Russia as a country where you're from, especially leaving it? I think that must have been quite difficult, not in the way that it was physically hard to do it, but more so that you're leaving behind a place you've grown up in and you've lived in your whole life and you can't really go back.
Yeah, up.
Yeah.
Maria has now gained citizenship in Iceland after escaping Russia by disguising herself as a delivery driver to cross through Belarus and Lithuania. After settling down away from her home country, she began to work on her book and her performance art. Here, she reflects on what it means to her.
I mean, when you do actions, it's definitely a joy. I mean, there are always like super funny situations and drive. But when you write, I mean, I think the main thing is I want something to stay alive. I mean, and this is the method which you can just use. Mm-hmm. I mean, one day I will not be alive, and this what is inside the books will be for people who will read.
Unfortunately, that is the end of this year's festival. But if you want more from the Festival of Politics, be sure to tune in next year. But thank you so much for watching. Until next year, bye-bye.